Hi, it's J. Stephen Roberts, and this is Real Crusades History. I'm finishing up a video right now about the Battle of Vienna, but I'm taking a break to do a quick presentation about the Battle of Belvoir Castle in 1182, which was one of many encounters between Saladin and the Kingdom of Jerusalem during the reign of King Baldwin IV. To provide some context, I'm going to first read a passage from R.C. Smail's classic book on the military history of the Crusades, Crusader Warfare, 1097 to 1193. Following his arrival at Damascus, Saladin invaded the Kingdom of Jerusalem without delay. He camped at al-Quwana, at the southern end of Lake Tiberias, and dispatched detachments to harry the countryside, one of which failed in an attack on Baisan in the Jordan Valley. He then crossed Jordan and ascended the heights overlooking the course of the river between Lake Tiberias and Baisan, and on which stood the new castle of Belvoir. The Franks opposed this invasion by methods which were typical of their normal military practice. Before it was launched, the field army, on its return from Transjordan, had immediately been reassembled at Safaria. As usual, the base was skillfully chosen. It was abundantly provided with water, had good communication with Acre and the coastal plain, and enabled the Franks rapidly to make contact with an invader who crossed Jordan either north or south of Lake Tiberias. Information of Saladin's movements was gained by quick reconnaissance, and it was decided to make immediate contact with the enemy. This was a normal decision, as was that to strengthen the Latin army by the addition of all immediately available troops, most of which were stationed in neighboring castles. The Franks marched to Tiberias, thence southward along the Jordan Valley, before ascending the heights in the neighborhood of Kaukab al-Hawa, which is Belvoir Castle. After a watchful night, they found themselves confronted by the enemy. A normal tactical situation developed. The Muslims attempted to force an engagement. The Franks relied on preserving their formation and refusing to be drawn into a general engagement. They were assailed by the Turkish mounted archers, and it's likely that from time to time the Turks came to close quarters. When they did so, the Latin knights fought back, and this has caused some writers to refer to this action as a battle. It is more probable that although there were short episodes in which there was hard fighting, there was no pitched engagement. Denied tactical success, Saladin withdrew to Damascus. So basically, Smail is pointing out that the Latin army had organized well and executed a successful defense of the kingdom. Okay, now I'm going to read an account of this battle as recorded in one of our primary sources, William of Tyre, a Frankish archbishop who knew Baldwin IV personally. During this time, Saladin had mustered forces from all over his domains to reinforce the army which he had brought with him from Egypt. Determined to invade our land, he now advanced to the place which is called in their tongue Raistlin, that is, the head of the waters. This is said to be only a short distance from our land, and is quite near the city of Tiberias. After remaining at Raistlin for a few days, Saladin suddenly entered our land and encamped before two rivers in a place known as Kavan, which is about 4 miles distant from Tiberias. Scouts soon reported this fact to our leaders. An immediate attack was decided upon, and the forces were hastily dispatched to Tiberias to unite with the contingent that had been sent there to protect that city and the fortified places in the vicinity, namely Safet and Belvoir. It happened that the Count of Tripoli, an able and valiant man of great experience in war, was at this time lying critically ill with an attack of double tertiary fever. This added much to the troubles of the Christians, for it deprived them at this critical time of the help of this great lord, on whose counsel and prudence they placed great reliance. Nevertheless, they called in additional forces from the neighboring places and marched forth against the foe with standards raised. As soon as Saladin heard that they were advancing, however, he crossed the Jordan with his armies and withdrew into the environs of Scythopolis. Thither the enemy's battalions marched and at once made a vigorous assault on a small fort situated on marshy land. But the townspeople offered a stout resistance, and the Turks found that they had no prospect of success. In order to march against the Christians, therefore, they directed their lines toward a new fortress, now called Belvoir, situated in the hills between Scythopolis and Tiberias. The Christians followed the course of the Jordan, until they arrived at the place just mentioned, when they left the valley and went up into the mountains. They were greatly exhausted by the intense heat, which became almost unendurable as they advanced. The night was passed in a state of constant vigilance, for they suspected that the enemy was in the vicinity. When morning came, they returned to the plain, which lies between the fortress just mentioned and a village called Forbelay. Here they beheld Saladin's forces stretching out all around in numbers far greater than they had ever been experienced before. In fact, the older princes of the kingdom declared that at no time since the Latins first entered Syria had they beheld such a mighty array of foes. The number of knights equipped for battle was about 20,000, while our cavalry was estimated at barely 700. Saladin and his nobles had one common intent and purpose, namely to surround our army completely, so that not a man might escape, for relying on their great numbers just given, they despised our small force and were confident that the Christians would be unable to withstand them. But far otherwise did it seem to him, who easily overcomes a great multitude with a few. Although in comparison with the enemy's hosts, our numbers seemed as nothing, yet upheld by the God of mercy, the Christians drew up their lines according to the rules of military science, and with their usual courage advanced upon the foe. Firmly they resisted the attacks against them, and although to their own everlasting disgrace many Christians, whose names we refrain from giving, ignominiously fled from the heat of battle, yet in that conflict we proved superior to our foes. Baldwin of Ramla and Balian his brother showed magnificent prowess that day, and fought with vigor and courage. Hugh the younger, stepson of the Count of Tripoli, who was with the contingent from Tripoli, also deserves that his memory be held in benediction. Although younger than the others, he strove with valor far beyond his age, and with the troops under his command routed and put to flight 3 companies of Turks. Then, by the grace of God, he returned uninjured to his friends. In that battle only a few of our knights fell, about to be received in the company of the saints above, but of the people many perished. The loss of the enemy was far greater. Some of their principal leaders also fell, a catastrophe which caused the infidels to desert the field of battle in consternation. The fact ought not to be passed over in silence that the heat during those days was so much greater than usual, that fully as many in both armies perished from sunstroke as by the sword. And concerning the number of the enemy slain, we could learn nothing positive, for to conceal their losses from us, they carried away the bodies of those who had fallen in battle, and stealthily buried them the next night in camp, lest the proof of their death might inspire our people with additional courage. We ascertained, however, that from the 2 causes named above, about 1,000 perished. Since matters had not turned out as he had hoped, and the Christians had proved stronger than he anticipated, Saladin now retired discomfited. He recrossed the Jordan, and returned to his own land, camping a second time in the place from which he had set out. Now that we've looked at William of Tyre, a Christian source, let's take a look at a Muslim source. This is the Chronicle of Ibn al-Athir, translated by D.S. Richards. After Saladin had come to Damascus, as we have related, he remained for some days to rest and repose, he and his troops. Then in July 1182 he marched into Frankish territory and made for Tiberias, in the vicinity of which he camped. He pitched his tents at Ukwana on the Jordan. The Franks arrived with their detachments and stopped at Tiberias. Saladin sent Farrukh Shah, his nephew, to Baisan, which he entered by force and plundered thoroughly, killing and enslaving. He swept through the Jordan depression with a far-reaching raid, which spread death and captivity over the inhabitants. The Bedouin arrived and raided Jinin, Lijun, and that region, even approaching the plain of Acre. The Franks left Tiberias and camped beneath the hill of Kaukab, that's Belvoir Castle. Saladin moved towards them and sent troops to shoot arrows at them, but they held their position and made no move to give battle. He ordered his 2 nephews, Taqi al-Din Umar and Izz al-Din Farrukh Shah, to charge the Franks with their troops. They fought a fierce engagement, and then the Franks withdrew in battle order and made camp at Afrabala. When Saladin saw the damage that he had inflicted on them and their lands, he retired to Damascus. Okay, so our 2 primary sources here are both biased, of course, and try to emphasize the successes of their respective sides in this engagement. But between our 2 sources, the Christian source and the Muslim source, it's obvious which one gives a clearer description of this engagement. And that's William of Tyre. William pretty much describes what happened, which is that Saladin invaded the kingdom, pillaged some territory, and then was confronted by a Crusader army which held its position and basically prevented him from continuing his campaign. There was no pitched battle, but Saladin was forced to withdraw. Therefore, this is a tactical failure for Saladin, as R.C. Smail pointed out. Ibn al-Athir's account is pretty vague and unclear. And after reading both an objective modern scholar and a Christian account of the battle, that becomes apparent. He emphasizes the pillaging aspect of the campaign and relishes in descriptions of Saladin burning Christian villages and enslaving peasants. But when he describes the campaign where Saladin encounters the Frankish army, he doesn't really say much. He says that Saladin's troops shot arrows at them, but the Franks refused to give battle. Then he says, when Saladin saw the damage that he had inflicted on them, he withdrew, as if trying to make it seem that Saladin had gone away satisfied, which he clearly hadn't. Saladin was trying to achieve here what he later achieved at Hattin, but as R.C. Smail and William of Tyre pointed out, the Frankish tactics prevented that. If you read between the lines, you can get the picture of what happened from Ibn al-Athir, but it's pretty vague. Also, Ibn al-Athir makes the clearly false statement that the Frankish army withdrew before Saladin did, which of course is not true. Saladin withdrew, and then they withdrew because they were acting defensively. If the Franks had withdrawn first, then Saladin would have continued his campaign. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and find Real Crusades History on Facebook and Twitter. If you like what we do, please click on the donate link in the About box to make a small PayPal donation to support our work.